Amy, let me tell you about a magical place that is so exactly designed to be enclosed space, year-round fun for the whole family that I bet you already know what I'm going to say before I even say the name. Let's say it together on 3. 1, 2, 3. Great Wolf Lodge. You got it, Amy.
My kids loved Great Wolf Lodge when we went. You probably already know that it has a huge indoor water park with a wave pool, lazy river, a bunch of massive water slides. But then your pack can hit the other attractions because, wait, there's more.
Great Wolf Lodge has adventure-packed attractions like Magi Quest, a live-action game kids can play throughout the lodge, plus the Northern Lights Arcade. Spent some quality time there, so your kid who loves the lazy river and your kid who loves fantasy games will both have a great time.
Great Wolf Lodge also offers great dining options and complimentary daily events like nightly dance parties, all under one roof. Unpack the car once and you're settled in to have fun. And with 22 lodges across the country, you're always a short drive away from adventure.
We've both had such great times at Great Wolf Lodge, so bring your pack together at a lodge near you. Learn more at greatwolf.com and strengthen the pack. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell, laughing in the face of motherhood. This is Margaret.
And this is Amy, and today we're talking to Beth Leipholtz. She's an inclusion and accessibility advocate who believes in creating a more accepting world for our children. As the hearing mother of a deaf child, Beth is raising her son, Coop, bilingually in both hearing and deaf cultures. Beth shares her parenting journey on TikTok, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at Beth and Coop, where she's built a community of more than 1 million people around disability inclusion. Beth lives with her family in Minnesota, and her new children's book is The ABCs of Inclusion. Welcome, Beth.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Beth, your journey to being an inclusion and accessibility advocate really sort of started with your own journey to motherhood. Will you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I found out I was pregnant with Cooper in January of 2019, actually like 36 hours after we got engaged. Totally not planning it. So, yeah, I always kind of say he was a surprise from the get-go, and he's just kept the surprises coming. So he was born in September of 2019 and did not pass his newborn hearing screening in the hospital, which is mandatory in Minnesota to do before they're released from the hospital. And so we were told just kind of, it's not a big deal. It happens. It can be fluid in the ears. So, being kind of that new mom phase, I was just like, okay, I don't need another thing to stress about. Didn't think too much of it. Knew that I would have to bring him back eventually. And when he was born, he actually had a big swash of white hair, and the rest of his hair was really dark, like mine is. And I had posted in a Facebook group I was in with other moms, and I was like, has anybody had, kids like this or seen this? And how has it kind of developed as they've gotten older? Like, is it a birthmark? And somebody mentioned Waardenburg syndrome in one of the comments. And I had never heard of it before. And so I started Googling, which is the best and worst thing to do in those.
Always the first step and sometimes the most ill-advised step.
I know. In this case, I'm glad.
Yeah, because in a world where you would never have heard of Waardenburg syndrome and your pediatrician didn't mention it, somebody on Facebook did. Okay, so what did you find out?
So I was, reading and researching what this, syndrome entailed. And whenever you hear syndrome, it's scary to an extent because there's so many unknowns. And so as I was looking, it was more out of curiosity at that point. Like, it didn't occur to me that this could actually be something that Cooper had. But as I was reading the symptoms and indicators, it was like a checklist of my baby. Like, he had that, the white swash, which is a really big indicator. He had wider set eyes. And at that point, they weren't as blue as they are now, but they were blue. And that's another common part of Waardenburg syndrome. And then I got to the part about being deaf or hearing loss being a huge component. And that's when my world kind of narrowed in. And I was just like, this is what we're dealing with, even though we didn't know yet. Like, I'd been watching to see if he responded to loud noises. We have 3 loud dogs, and he never even flinched. And so at that point I knew, but obviously we didn't get his full diagnosis until he was 6 weeks old.
Okay, so tell us about your stages of processing that news, Beth, and your spouse's and what that was like.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was still, had just come around to the idea of being a mom. Like, I was not prepared for that. Like I said, he was a surprise, and it was like, that was a big life change in itself. And it never occurred to me that, my child would have any sort of special needs. Nothing came up during my pregnancy. Nothing was super abnormal. And so I think in a way, I'm glad that I had that person make that comment and I had time to read about Waardenburg syndrome and kind of prepare myself, because it did make the diagnosis easier in a way. But at the same time, having that solid diagnosis and saying this is his level of loss because I was holding out hope that, okay, well, maybe he can hear a little bit in this year or this year, maybe he's not totally deaf, like, because it was just scary to me. And so when we did get his testing done and he pretty much, the level of hearing loss, he probably couldn't have even heard a jet plane taking off next to him. Like, that's how profound his hearing loss was. And for the first couple of weeks, I couldn't even bring myself to say the word deaf. Like, I don't know if it just sounded so finalized to me, like
real, right?
Yeah. And I didn't know any of like the beauty within that world yet. And so it was just like scary sounding. I won't say that I went through denial because I didn't. I knew. But I think I went through the rest of the stages of grief for sure. And I still do. That's something I like to point out is like, it's not, linear. It's a cyclical thing that you cycle through and it never really ends. But at the same time, you find like the silver linings in it.
And that's something we've talked about with other people and talked about for ourselves, having kids with different needs, disabilities, that I think there's a lot of understanding now that people with different abilities, there's fantastic gains in that. But sometimes it can be a little bit difficult as moms to kind of accept that grieving phase, because it doesn't mean we wish our kids were different. It doesn't mean that what our kids are is bad, but finding the space to have some grief over the fact that this is a different journey than maybe the one we expected. Tell us a little bit about that process for yourself and how you've seen that reflected as you talk about disability with other moms.
I mean, I feel like I have to mention the poem, Welcome to Holland. So anybody in the kind of special needs parenting world, I think, understands that. It's about exactly that, a journey that you think you're taking and ending up in a different place, but still finding all the beauty within the place that you did end up. And so I think you go through this like cycle of grief where you don't want to feel like you're, grieving your child who's in front of you or wishing that they were different or wishing that you had a different child, because that's not it. But you have to kind of go through that grief of what you thought you were going to have, more so like the way you thought life was going to look, to be able to, pick up those pieces and do what you need to do to move on to what life actually is. And I think until you can do that, you're not going to find like those beautiful pieces in it. And I know for me, there was a lot of comparison that I struggled with where it was like, okay, well, he's just deaf. He doesn't have cancer. He doesn't I found myself minimizing a lot what I was feeling, which in retrospect, I think is a problem in itself too. Like, just because it's not somebody else's worst case scenario, it can still be yours and those feelings are valid. And so I think that's what I tell new moms a lot when they come to me too, is like, just let yourself feel what you're feeling. And like, this is not what you expected. This is scary. And like, that's okay. You don't have to, what other people are going through doesn't matter right now.
Sometimes I think it can be hard because then you have to take this to not making any assumptions about your own situation, but say your kid has a tough diagnosis, then you have to take it to the grandparents who have their own reaction to this diagnosis, right? Who might start very much at stage 1 of denial. And you're like, nope, it's definitely true. Nope, it's definitely profound. Nope, it's definitely happening. And then you have to do your own work, right? So that you're then ready to walk other people through it and help other people understand that. Do you find that's part of the thing that parents of kids with special needs find difficult?
Yeah, definitely. I don't want to make it sound like my husband's parents were in great denial, but they were to an extent. My parents are very much the opposite, where they're just kind of like, this is what we're dealing with. I've seen you get through hard things before. You always struggle at the beginning. You pull yourself up, and that's what we're going to do here. They weren't discounting my feelings by any means. Like, I sat on my parents' couch and cried for hours that day. But I think just them being so logical and knowing like they've seen me come out the other side of things and reminding me of that is what I needed at that point. Because, other people in that journey do have the ability to either make it a lot harder for you or make it a lot easier for you. And so I guess, we're lucky in the sense that we do have support from all sides when it comes to that. My husband's mom's sister is actually deaf too. So she did have, experience with that growing up. It was very different because they were a lot, like deaf people in general were a lot more isolated just because, this was years ago too. So, and her sister used mainly sign language. And so it was just a very different experience, and also not Waardenburg syndrome. So that's just a really weird coincidence.
Wow. So it really was just completely coincidental.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating.
So yeah, so my husband's aunt, her daughter, and her kids are all deaf. So that's been really cool to be able to like kind of navigate deaf culture too by having them as a resource.
I want to talk a little bit about deaf culture. We'll be right back and talk a little bit about what that journey's been like.
Hellions, it's time for some spring cleaning, and I don't just mean the coat closets. Doing your financial spring cleaning can actually be super easy when you let Monarch do your financial spring cleaning for you. One dashboard that gets your entire financial life organized. No more clutter, no more mess, no more logins scattered everywhere, just accounts, investments, property, and more, all in one place. Get your first year of Monarch for half off, just $50 with promo code FRESH. Monarch allows you to look not only at what you've already spent, but also to plan for the future. With Monarch, you can set savings goals, plan for big purchases, and notice spending trends before they become a problem. I can generate cash flow reports that show me what we spent this quarter, this month, what we're probably going to spend next month, and feel prepared, organized, and knowing how to plan for the future. No more surprises and a lot more clarity. Try Monarch. Use code FRESH at monarch.com to get your first year half off at just $50. That's 50% off your first year at monarch.com with code FRESH. My favorite skincare products actually feel more like self-care, like they're so nice to put on and they smell so good that I'm actually happy when I get to that part of my day. And I swear that is how I feel about Osea's anti-aging body balm.
Amy, you are usually the lotions and potions queen on this podcast, but I have to say, hard agree.
Osea's anti-aging body balm is a liquid silk body balm that combines the lasting hydration of a lotion with the firming power of a serum, leaving skin smoother and firmer.
This body balm is clinically tested and designed to deliver visible results you can see and feel.
So we've gotten to use this product for a couple of months now, and I swear I have really noticed firmer and smoother skin, like on the back of my hands. It's like getting a mini spa treatment from head to toe.
Get a spring-worthy glow with clean, clinically tested skincare from Osea. And right now, we have a special discount just for our listeners.
Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code FRESH at OseaMalibu.com.
That's 10% off your first order with code FRESH at OSEAMalibu.com. Amy, when I'm having a good hair day, it usually makes my whole day better. And that's why on every day, I'm taking Nutrafol.
Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand. And it's the #1 hair growth supplement brand personally used by dermatologists. Nutrafol's hair growth supplements are peer-reviewed, NSF certified for sport, and clinically tested.
Nutrafol offers multiple formulas for men and women, tailored to different life stages and lifestyle factors, so you get support that's actually right for you. Adding Nutrafol to your daily routine is easy. Order online, no prescription needed, with automated deliveries and free shipping to keep you on track.
Let your hair be one less thing to worry about. See visibly thicker, stronger, faster-growing hair in 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol.
For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you visit Nutrafol.com and enter promo code LAUGHING.
That's Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code LAUGHING.
So before the break, we were just starting to use the word deaf culture. I had a career goal at some point to be a sign language interpreter, and I learned so much. And one of the big things that I learned is that ASL, American Sign Language, is an actual different language than English, which I think seems very obvious once you know it. But I always thought that ASL was just representing the words of the English language. It's in fact a completely different language. Starting your journey learning about deafness through Coop, I had a very small glimpse of it, and there's a lot to learn.
It was very, very new to me. I knew a few basic signs, but I also didn't know it was its own language. You think it's like the equivalent of English, but you just have like a sign for every word, and that's not it at all. And so I've found, I minored in Spanish, and I found that when I was learning sign language, it actually was more similar to Spanish structure in a way. So like there's times where I would be like thinking in Spanish while signing, and like it just, you have like this language part of your brain that just ends up like kind of overwhelmed, but also like just kind of takes over. So that's been interesting. But it's also the fact that like when you have a toddler who is bilingual, essentially learning 2 languages, it's a lot of the parents I know don't sign the correct ASL order because they're also speaking. And that's definitely the case for us. So it's, I call that approach more total communication. So like I still sign in the order of how I'm speaking because Like I can't talk and be signing the words in a different order and have it make any sense. And so for Coop, needing that spoken language as well, that's just kind of how you'd work with toddlers, I guess.
What are the choices that you have to go through? As a hearing parent of a deaf child, there are choices, right? You can choose to use sign language exclusively, to teach your child to lip read exclusively, to do some combination. Why did you make the choices you made? Why were those right for Coop and for your family?
Yeah. So the kind of 3 options, I guess, that we were presented with were using ASL on its own, which I didn't know any at that point, so that was scary. Using only spoken language approach by using hearing devices, which for some kids would be hearing aids. For Cooper, it meant finding out if he was a cochlear implant candidate and going through that process. And then that total communication approach where you're kind of combining those. And there's some push and pull around that in the professional world sometimes, because there's the idea that teaching sign language will hinder a child's ability to learn spoken language, or they'll start relying more on sign language. And luckily, like the professionals that we were dealing with never expressed that. It was very supported all around for our approach, which was, eventually cochlear implants when he was 9 months old, and then using sign language from the moment we found out he was deaf, and still today.
It's such a interesting parallel. I have a child on the spectrum, and it's that you do your own research, a similar experience of Googling and being like, oh, this is definitely my kid, and then kind of bringing that diagnosis forward. And then also navigating the schools of thought that some people will say, well, you have to do this kind of therapy. Then you'll read, no, that kind of therapy is abusive and terrible and absolutely the wrong thing. And navigating the different voices that are out there. This is not settled science, any of the kind of techniques that are used for any variety of diagnosis. And is it an issue, do you think, of finding your own confidence or just feeling like you know your own child? How do you make the decisions around what's right for your kid in a world where there are hundreds of different voices saying very firmly, this is absolutely the only answer and this is absolutely horrible and will ruin your child's life?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard one too. And I should mention too that cochlear implants are a very divisive topic in the deaf community.
Well, walk us through that. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, there's people. So this is something I never realized before venturing into this world, is that deaf culture, there's so much pride in it. People who are deaf are so proud to be deaf and use ASL and aren't necessarily like against hearing devices, but, and I don't want to speak as a whole. That's why I'm being careful with my words here, because I don't want to like sound like I'm speaking for anybody. I'm just speaking from my hearing parent of a deaf child perspective, and what I've learned is that, if you're making decisions for a child is what it's viewed as when you're deciding to give them cochlear implants at a young age. My view of that is that you're always making decisions for your child. I think that's part of what being a parent is. And you look at, where you are in life. For me, I live in rural Minnesota. I knew that there was no deaf or hard of hearing school anywhere near us. I also knew that our roots are pretty deep here and we weren't likely picking up to move. So that Cooper, was going to be raised in a hearing world. And in order to give him the most chance at success and language development, I wanted him to have access to sound and sign language. And I think because of that, I haven't dealt with quite as much criticism as I could have. I definitely still have. I'm lucky in the sense of I didn't have the following on social media that I do now when we were making these decisions. So I didn't have all that pushback and negativity at that time. It was more like as I've, grown and we've been down this road a while that I get these comments or messages occasionally. And now I have, 2 legs to stand on. Like, I'm very confident in the decisions that we made. I don't doubt them. I know that he prefers to speak, but also knows a ton of sign language when he wants to use it. And I think that's made a big difference too, is dealing with that type of stuff down the line versus right away.
Talk to us a little bit about the journey of sharing your story and what that's been like, kind of the highs and lows. I'm sure there's great positives in being out on social media and sharing your family story, and probably some lows as well. Talk to us a little bit about how that developed.
Yeah, I never set out for it to become what it has by any means. I think at the beginning, it was just like, so I've been alcohol-free almost 10 years. And when I started that journey, it really helped me to kind of, write about it and share it and talk about it on social media. And I found through doing that while I was helping myself, I was also helping other people in the same position. And so I think this kind of started that same way. Like, it was a really good way of like working through it myself. But I knew that down the line, I would be able to be a resource that I wanted at the beginning of this journey. And so that's really how it started. I would say the growth really started when I got on TikTok and had no idea what I was doing. Honestly, showed my sister a video I posted and she's like, wait, that has like hundreds of thousands of views. And I was like, isn't that what TikTok is? I don't know. And so that's where the growth really started. And then obviously began building off of that. But it's been really neat to see such a tight-knit community form. There's, one of the things that really got me through the hard times at the beginning of this was connecting with other parents of children with cochlear implants. And the way that I did that was social media because, there's not a huge community locally for us of that. And so to be able to reach out to people who had kids that were older and see kind of where they are now, or people who had toddlers when Cooper was a newborn was really, really reassuring for me. And I think that also helped my husband a lot. I think he was just having a harder time kind of picturing what the future could look like. Whereas I was just, ingesting all of this and to be able to show him look at this kid thriving was super helpful. And so, yeah, in the time since, it's obviously grown a lot across all platforms. It still blows my mind sometimes. Overall, it's incredibly positive. I would say 99% of my interactions on social media are positive, probably because I've blocked all the people that have really strong.
I was going to say, that's a pretty high number.
Yeah,
you've got good blocking skills.
Pretty much. And good word filtering.
Was it an organic journey for you from talking about being the parent of a deaf child in the cochlear implant community to talking more generally about inclusion and awareness? How did that happen, or did it just happen?
I think that kind of just generally was a natural transition. I wouldn't even say it was a transition because it wasn't something intentional. I think it just, as our audience, I don't even like to say that, but as the community grew, I realized, these aren't just parents of kids who are deaf and hard of hearing, people who had kids with autism, people who had kids, with other behavioral or other different types of syndromes were following too and relating to what I was saying. And so I think that's when I realized this, yes, it's specific to what we're going through, but it's also very relatable for just parents who are going through anything that wasn't expected. And I think for me, I lack the ability to hide my emotions and pretend everything's fine and all put together. And so to be able to just be authentic about parenting on social media, I think is refreshing for a lot of people too. When you live, I will say, I think it's gotten better in recent years. I think people are more realistic than they used to be, especially with TikTok. I feel that's a much more kind of raw and vulnerable platform versus the more polished, what you see on Instagram sometimes. And I think the rise of video content has really helped with that. And so that's always been important to me, is to not present this polished, perfect life, because toddlers are crazy. Newborns are crazy too in their own way. That's a phase I don't want to go through again.
Take it from us. Teens are crazy too. It's all out there waiting for you. No, it definitely gets better. It gets different. It gets better. It gets easier, but crazy stays.
No, I love it. I love the stage he's at now. It's by far the most challenging for sure, but it's also he's his own little person, and that's so cool to see. And especially with his language development, to see him repeating things back to me in the right context, things that I say, I'm realizing that I have to be really careful.
Yeah. Once they start to learn. Let's take a break and we're going to come back and talk all about the book.
All my kids learned to swim when they were little. It was super important to me that they be confident and safe in the water. There was only one problem with that: taking them to swim lessons. The pools were freezing. There were always cranky adults doing laps right there. And it was definitely not, for any of us, what you would call fun.
Amy, heard. But now there's Goldfish Swim School. Goldfish takes a really thoughtful approach to swim lessons, combining research-based teaching with a warm, kid-friendly environment that actually helps kids thrive in the water.
Every detail at Goldfish is thoughtfully designed to create a golden experience, from shiver-free, warm indoor pools to comfy waiting areas for parents to professionally trained lifeguards on deck.
Goldfish uses an approach called the science of swim play, which combines guided play with proven teaching techniques to help kids learn to swim, build water safety skills, and gain confidence, all at their own pace. Lessons are designed to meet kids exactly where they're at.
If you've been thinking about swim lessons or just wondering where to start, this is a great opportunity. Right now, Goldfish Swim School is offering a waived membership plus your child's first lesson free at participating locations.
Just visit goldfishswimschool.com/free to find a location near you and enroll using promo code FREE.
That's goldfishswimschool.com/free, promo code FREE.
At DSW, we ask the important questions, like, what shoes are you going to wear? Whether you're prepping for wedding season, festival season, or just planning the ultimate vacay, the right shoes can make or break an RSVP. So own the moment. You've got big plans, and we've got just the shoes. At the perfect price, of course. Get ready to get ready with Designer Shoe Warehouse. Head to your DSW store or dsw.com today and let us surprise you.
So we're talking to Beth Leipholtz. She is, you know her from online at Beth and Coop, and she is the author of the new children's book, The ABCs of Inclusion. So let's talk about that. So you have this huge parent community, and at what point did the light bulb go off like, oh, there are kids to sort of educate about these issues who need this content?
Yeah. So the idea for the book as a whole just came about by people, asking, when's the kids' book coming? Since I'd written a nonfiction book about the journey before that. And so it just kind of occurred to me one day, I can actually do this. But then the thing I was dealing with was, okay, well, how do I make this a book that people can relate to outside of like the deaf and hard of hearing community? Because my community is so much more than that. So that's what I struggled with and tried to work through in my head for a while was like, what book do I want to write? And I was just driving one day and it popped into my head like, okay, well, I know all of these parents, I know all of these, children that we've kind of connected with through this journey who have these different diagnoses, all of which, entail different challenges. And why not write a kid's book, illustrated like a kid's book, but base those characters on real children? And so that's how the whole ABCs of inclusion idea was born. Each letter of the alphabet aligns with the name of the child. And so that's something I like to make note of because a lot of people think it's the diagnosis. So it's not like if D is for deaf, that's not how it is. So like C is for Cooper, and then it talks about being deaf. So that person first language was important to me. And so once that idea took off, it spiraled from there.
You used a term like child first language, which I'm not sure people are totally familiar with, but it's something in disability community, the idea that you're meeting the person first and that their disability is one of the many things about them as a person. And it's something, again, that before being in this world, I wasn't really familiar with. And is that, as you told the stories of these real children, is that something that was important to you to say, like, these kids, yes, it's a story of inclusion and it's a story that focuses on kids' disabilities, but how do you keep the child at the center of that story and not the disability?
Yeah. And I think my viewpoint on that was formed, like I said, from getting sober and kind of, being in that world for a while and learning to say like a person with an alcohol use disorder versus like an alcoholic. So I think that's always been kind of ingrained in me, but it was important to me, obviously, to do the names, like that is who the child is. They are not their diagnosis. But then also like throughout the book, you'll see most of the pages actually just like have a little snippet at the end that kind of relate back to like, this is what they like to do, or this is how they do it, even if it's a little bit different. And so it's something that like kids can connect with. Like Phoenix is my P and he has diabetes. And whenever we read that page, Cooper's more excited about like the fact that he's coloring a picture on the table than, seeing his pump and that stuff. So it's like, that's what kids kind of pick out is like, oh, you're the same as me in this way, at least at the age that he's at now.
What really spoke to me about this book is that there's 26 kids, as you said. There are kids with anxiety and there are kids in wheelchairs. There are kids with epilepsy that's invisible most of the time, and there are kids whose difference is quite visible. It was really eye-opening to me as somebody coming to this work maybe more newly, that differences, if there's something that's universal, it's that we have differences. There's no sort of 100% typical kid. Everybody's got their something. I thought that was really refreshing. And was that also something that was very intentional to you to make part of the book?
Yeah, personally, I've dealt with depression and anxiety my whole life. So, that's pretty invisible most of the time. And so just having that aspect to kind of pull back to, I wanted kids to realize, you can't always see what makes people different, and sometimes you can. But, if you see a friend having a really hard day or, making a lot of noise but not saying anything, you can relate it back to the book and be like, you remember this letter. That's what they were going through and you couldn't see it. So maybe this is something similar. So that's kind of I wanted those teaching moments to be there for kids to kind of realize as they encounter different people throughout school to be able to relate back to characters in the book.
I think it can be challenging for adults and kids to feel like we're not ignoring and pretending that differences don't exist, but that we're also meeting people and not disabilities. How do you help both children and adults navigate that? And is it different for children and adults?
Yeah, it's a hard line to figure out because even I remember, referring to Cooper as having special needs at one point. There were so many adults on that video that jumped on me saying like that they didn't like that term and that, their being deaf wasn't a disability. And then there were other deaf adults who were like, it absolutely is. And so it's like, you can have two people who have the same diagnosis who view it completely differently. Like that's just reality. So it really is a person by person basis, and the way that I view it, Cooper does have special needs, additional needs. Like he has somebody who works with him at school. He has a device he wears. His teacher has a microphone she wears. Like those are needs that make, him have the best chance at learning things the same way that his peers do and having access to that. And so I think, with inclusion as a whole, there's no like one size fits all. Some people prefer not to have any of their differences acknowledged or called out, and some people do. And so, with kids, it's obviously a little bit harder to navigate because they don't know what they don't know. I mean, like with Cooper, we're just raising him to be like, these are my ears. They're really cool. I can turn you off sometimes if I don't want to listen to you. And like, he thinks that's awesome. But, that's not to say that as he's a teenager, he's going to want that same type of like attention to them. So I think it's just important to be mindful. And obviously with adults, you can read that a little bit better and ask them.
How do you hope the kids whose stories and whose lived experiences are reflected in this book are going to feel when they see themselves in the pages of this book?
Yeah, I want them to feel, represented the way we have a couple other books at home that have kids with cochlear implants, and I'll read them with Cooper and I'll like make a little like point to their, their head, and he'll be like, ears like me. That's what I want kids to see in that book, whether it is a visible thing or not, to be able to be like, I'm not alone. There's other kids like this, but at the same time, be able to, read other pages and be like, oh, I have a friend who is like this. And like, so my letter I is Isla. She lives here in the same area that we do, and she has Down syndrome. So Cooper loves that page because he knows her and can like relate to that. And so I want that for sure, for kids who maybe don't have necessarily any of the things in the book themselves, but know kids who do.
That's right. To see their siblings or their friends or a kid at school who maybe they don't know well yet, to see those things reflected, because I do think there is some fear and anxiety around differences that kids have, and helping them see differences helps them navigate the feeling of there's a kid underneath that, whatever the difference, and that it leads hopefully to some more connection between kids.
Yeah. And I'm super passionate too about like, don't teach your kids that it's not okay to ask questions. I understand that there's a time and a place, and like teaching that is good. But like speaking from my own experience, would much rather people ask questions than just, stare and that kind of stuff. So often if I see kids looking at, wondering what they are, I'll ask the question. I'll be like, are you wondering what those are? And then, take the time to tell them. And same with parents. Like, I would much rather somebody say, like, do you mind if we ask you a question so I can explain to my kid, what these are? And at the same time, too, parents don't know everything. Like, there's going to be situations, too, where I'm sure Cooper will ask questions and I won't know the answer. And being able to say, I don't know, but maybe when we get home, we can do a little bit of research and try to figure it out. Or if it's appropriate, maybe we can ask, that type of thing.
We've been talking to Beth Leipholtz. Her new children's book is The ABCs of Inclusion. So Beth, tell us where we can find the book. Tell us where we can find you and Coop on the internet, all the things.
All of the things are at bethandcoop.com. My full-time job is web design, so my website is just like the whole picture there. I try to make it really easy to find exactly what you're looking for. The links to order the book is super obvious, and then you can find all my social media and any other resources. Everything else is on there too.
Awesome. And Beth's book, The ABCs of Inclusion, is out now. We'll link in our show notes so that you can find where to buy a copy for yourself. Beth, thanks so much for talking to us today.
Yes, this was great. Thank you guys for having me.
Thanks, Beth.